I'm Lydia Brimelow, and I'm the president of the VDARE Foundation. Recently, my husband, Peter, announced that we are being forced to close our flagship project, the patriotic immigration website, vdare.com, and that he's resigning as editor. He said that vdare.com had been murdered by Letitia James after a massive 2-year investigation, and we've not been charged with anything. But Peter also said that the fantastic costs of that investigation have made it almost impossible for us to continue to do business in the face of the cancel culture onslaught that we'd have to deal with at the same time. So now I'm going to talk about that because it's what I dealt with more directly at the VDARE Foundation. When I first started at VDARE, I was brought on as a fundraiser, and that's actually what I enjoy doing. But we're a small organization, and when a crisis happens, it's all hands on deck. Over time, over the last decade, the issues with cancellation and our inability to function as a back office became more and more dominant in what I had to do to keep VDARE operable. Fighting these fights in parallel with this extremely onerous investigation has proved impossible, and vdare.com can no longer publish as a result. I put this on record in a 5,000-word article that's been published on vdare.com, and I thought it was really important to spell everything out there as clearly as I could, listing about 50 different services that our back office has been canceled from, whether they be social media, our ability to distribute our message through email, various technologies that are important for making the back office work, or most critical, financial services that are essentially inaccessible to us now and have contributed directly to the suspension of vdare.com. When Peter announced his resignation and the closure of vdare.com, there was a flurry of social media discussion of it, but there's been essentially no mainstream coverage. There hasn't even been much independent media coverage of it. And I don't think anybody knows what it's like to try to run a small dissident organization under the kind of pressure that we've been under. And that is why I felt like I needed to write it all out. Without this kind of documentation, it'll be more challenging to build a case for federal legislation that would break up this totalitarian marketplace where VDARE has been completely paralyzed. We can't be the only organization that's experiencing these challenges. But as I talk to other organizations that I think would be targeted, it seems like we are more targeted. We've experienced a broader range of cancellations than anyone else. The 50-plus institutions that canceled us are ones that I had direct interactions with, that I spoke to their customer service agents or signed a contract with, and were in a position to cancel us. And so those are the ones that we were officially canceled from. That number does not include the many, many companies that I would never have approached because their terms of service are so explicitly anti-speech, anti-freedom of speech. So that includes like Wells Fargo Bank or other organizations that I had already heard had canceled other people and whose terms of service made it clear that if they received a little bit of pressure, they would cancel us. So it's not worth my time to pursue. There are news outlets such as Reclaim the Net that monitor these things very carefully. And so whenever I would see coverage of a particular company and their efforts to censor speech, I would make note of that and try to avoid them in the future. But some of these companies are so big you can't really avoid them. And everyone should take serious note that Microsoft is one of these companies. They have it in their terms of service that if you are detected engaging in hate speech or facilitating hate speech, one is left to wonder what it means to facilitate hate speech. They will suspend your services. They will suspend your Microsoft account, meaning you can't access Word, you can't access your Outlook, and it's up to their interpretation as to why. So not only are they reading what you're writing, but they also are prepared to pull the rug out from under you at any moment to stop your work from continuing. I'm going to highlight a few particularly atrocious or strange stories that I experienced during my tenure at vdare.com trying to stave off cancel culture. It started with constant contact. One day I was unable to send emails. We'd been using constant contact for years. And sometimes when that happens, it's because they wanted you to call and verify that your signups were legitimate, and you have to promise, like, yes, these people actually have opted in. And so I thought it was a normal maintenance level suspension that as soon as I called in would be resolved. But in fact, the customer service agent on the other end said, "Oh, you've been suspended. We no longer do business with your industry." And I said, "What industry is that? Nonprofits? Journalists?" And he said, "No, white supremacy. It's not just business. Often the cancellation is accompanied with some kind of punitive act on the part of the canceling service." So in one case, that was MailChimp. When they canceled us, they also held our email lists hostage and would not give them back to us, despite it being very clear in their terms of service that your email lists belong to you and not to them. Another case that was painful to me personally was when Facebook kicked off everyone on our organization, and that included personal pages, like my personal Facebook page. And when they did that, they took all my data as well, including the video of my middle daughter learning to walk, when I don't have another copy of that. To me, it's clear on the basis of those experiences that this is not just a political effort to silence us, which would be bad enough. It's personal. These people want us to personally feel pain in our personal lives. And there's been some talk recently about whether or not people on the other side of these political controversies, whether or not they hate us. If they don't hate us, where's the video of Courier's first steps, and why can't I have it back? If they don't hate us, why do they try to stab us on the way out the door when they're the ones kicking us out in the first place? If they don't hate us, but this is how they treat us, how do you describe what it is they do feel? And what's the difference? I think we should just operate under the assumption that they're going to treat us as poorly as they possibly can. And whether you can attribute that to hate seems largely irrelevant. VDR Foundation was kicked off of Stripe earlier this year and terminally became unable to accept online payments in about March. But this struggle to maintain online payments has been going on since 2014. In 2014, VDR was supported by PayPal, and we knew that PayPal was vulnerable because it was already kicking other people off. So at that time, I asked my tech people to set up a backup to PayPal, and they chose Stripe. And when PayPal kicked us off, it worked out beautifully because we already had Stripe integrated onto the website, and we were able to just click it over. Once Stripe was our main online payment processor, I wanted to have a backup against Stripe in the same way that Stripe had been a backup against PayPal. And so for the next 7 years, I worked to find a backup and basically was unable to. About 3 years ago, after going through a bunch of different processors, I contacted GabPay and I developed a relationship with them, and we set GabPay up as our fallback processor. But unfortunately, when Stripe kicked us off, it turned out that GabPay's banks were not resilient, and the banks that they had connected us with also kicked us off. So GabPay only lasted a couple of weeks, and our feedback from them at the time was that they're getting pressure from federal regulators. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they were speaking loosely about that, but it's the only clue I have as to why VDR has such a consistently difficult time getting online payments when other, even dissident companies don't seem to have the challenges that we have. There are other organizations that have a very difficult time getting online payments. We're certainly not the only one. However, some of them have so much volume and so much of an audience that it seems like companies are willing to take the money and not punish them. Others of them have gotten clear explanations for why they're kicked off, which is their inclusion in the match list. So the match list is a list of blacklisted fraudsters, criminals, terrorists that all the major credit cards share. When you read about the match list, it doesn't look like it was set up with any political intent, but I have heard rumors that other dissident right organizations have found themselves on the match list And therefore, they haven't spun their wheels and wasted their time the way that I have in trying to get another backup payment processor because they know they're never going to get it. But VDARE was told pretty straightforwardly by a bank that we utilized that we're not on the match list. So the reason we're kicked off is this vague, unexplained reputational risk. As the end user of these services that cancel me, I am left to speculate what the actual motivations are. I don't know if it's federal pressure. I don't know if we're on some major blacklist that just hasn't been shared with me. But these anecdotes are the only clues that I have as to why this is happening to us and why it continues to happen to us. Speaking of blacklists, I didn't spend time in my article identifying all the different hotels that kicked us out. That's something that's been pretty well written about on VDARE over the years. But I did talk about PSAV, which is a major vendor to hotels and motels around the country. I believe they service about 2,000, and they provide all the audiovisual services and equipment that we might need if we were going to have a conference. At one point, I was canceled out of a conference, and the salespeople forgot to tell the vendors that we'd been canceled out. So I got called from both the caterer and the audiovisual crew to say, oh my gosh, your conference is supposed to be in 4 days and we haven't arranged what you need. And I had to tell them, well, there is no conference because the hotel canceled me. The representative from PSAV on the phone at that time said, oh, that's funny. Why do you have a red flag on your client file that I'm looking at right here? And of course, I couldn't answer him because we've never actually worked with PSAV. I'm surprised we even have a client file. And I asked him, why do people get red flags? You tell me. He said, I don't know, maybe you didn't pay a bill, or maybe you're extremely difficult to work with. But neither of those things can be true because we never worked with them before. And I did have 2 different instances with hotels that canceled me right around the time when they were connecting me to PSAV as their AV vendor. And I can't help but think now that they're running their own private blacklists to keep clients out of hotels that they don't want to work with for political reasons. There was one company that represented to me that they had a blacklist, and I actually don't believe them. I don't know the story behind it. It actually makes no sense. When I was canceled from Mineral Tree, which is an accounts payable service that helped facilitate my bill pay, basically, because I have a remote bookkeeper, they told her Lydia Brimelow's social security number is affiliated with the alt-right, with membership in the alt-right. So what they're telling me is that they check people's social security numbers against their political memberships, their political registration. This is ludicrous on multiple levels. The first level is that the alt-right has no registry, as far as I know. Certainly if they did, I never joined it. And I never actually wore the mantle of the alt-right anyway. That's not a label that I took for myself. I'm saying myself because they said my social security number. They didn't say vdare.com. Furthermore, even if I had registered, how would a random accounts payable service be able to check my political affiliations? And if they were, why would they purge me for it? I don't know what the advantage is for them to have told me that they have a political blacklist, one that's clearly ludicrous that they couldn't have. What is it that they're actually hiding? What was the actual reason? The whole situation is just mind-boggling. I was born and raised in Texas, and now I'm a proud West Virginia resident, and I thought we lived in a free country, but it turns out we don't. There are solutions to these problems. There can be federal legislation that could prevent viewpoint discrimination from continuing and that would break up this totalitarian marketplace. There are models for this, such as Texas House Bill 20 and legislation that was passed recently in Tennessee to prevent banks from engaging in viewpoint discrimination. But they need to be made federal. The problem with the House Bill 20 in Texas is that it's limited to social media platforms. So while you can't perhaps be censored on social media, that doesn't prevent your email service from canceling you, and then you can't get your message out outside of social media. The problem with the Tennessee bank legislation is that it's limited to Tennessee. And one thing that I've learned the hard way is that none of these banks are independent. None of them are an island. They all require the use of services that are national or at least across state lines. And if they get pressured by these other services, then they will cancel you. And I don't know how that works with the legislation, whether that would be an excuse that the courts would accept or how that's going to work. But regardless, states like West Virginia and Florida and Wyoming and any other patriotic state should be adopting the same legislation so that we can protect the First Amendment in this country going forward. At VDARE, we don't know what the future holds. VDARE.com is being suspended, but the VDARE Foundation remains. I remain the president of the VDARE Foundation board. And we'll continue fighting as much as we can. There are still ways that you can donate to VDARE.com. You can send paper checks the old-fashioned way to P.O. Box 211, Litchfield, Connecticut 06759. Or you can donate to our Give Send Go, which is givesendgo.com/VDARE. That money will be used to support our ongoing legal troubles with Letitia James, which are still unresolved, and to wind down the company to the best of our ability within our fiduciary responsibilities. At any rate, whatever the future holds, we'll see you on the other side.